Welcome to the webinar. Today's topic is Never Hire Another Originator That Is Not a Cultural Fit. Hi, I'm Pat Sherlock, President of QFS Sales Solutions, and today I'm going to share with you our research on cultural fit. So let's get started. We're going to cover the hiring challenge, why the cultural fit matters, what the structured interview process should look like, the types of hiring evaluations, and how to determine cultural fit and best practices. And then we'll have time for Q&A. The hiring challenge that all of you face today in mortgage banking is very difficult. Obviously, everyone is competing for originators, and it's a very robust market from a competition standpoint. I'm sure you've had this happen where the resume looks great, you're all excited, the person interviews well, you know the same people, they have the right experience. You've evaluated their W-2. You might have even looked at a pipeline report. They join you, and they are a bust, a real disaster. When you know this, it happens very quickly, and usually that issue is that there is a lack of cultural fit. While 90% of the managers believe in cultural fit, less than 25% actually interview for cultural fit. Why does this happen? Again, mostly because there's a war for talent. And as we go forward in mortgage banking, cultural fit is going to take a more important role in our interviewing process due to the fact that we have to make better selections of the sales candidates. Even when you look at other types of industries, in particular the sports arena, my own Philadelphia Eagles let go Deshaun Jackson this year just for this issue that there was no cultural fit with the coaching team. So why does cultural fit matter? Well, cultural fit is all about having better performance, the person ramps up faster, and the customer is served better. In this competitive market, all of those three issues are very important to a company and the sales teams. So let's look closely at the structured interview process. The interview process has three prongs to it. The first part is the part that I call, can they do the job? That's the talent evaluation part of it. It looks at, does the person have sales talent or sales behaviors? The second part is, what is their sales knowledge? Do they really understand consultative selling? At the end of the day, when an originator leaves from company A to go to company B, you're talking about someone that has to rebuild their pipeline because the research shows that they lose 50% of it when they make that decision to change to a different lender. So the talent end of it has to be there. The second part of the interview process is very important, and I think a lot of managers really don't put this as part of the screening process, but they really should, and that's determining where is that person today? Will they do the job? What are their current motivations, and where are they in what I call the scale of being comfortable? If they are really comfortable and they have to make changes in their prospecting or in other parts of their sales techniques, if they're comfortable doing it the old way, they're not going to be willing to do that. So the second end of it, of a structured interview process, is will they do the job? The third part of it is the cultural fit issue. Do they fit your culture? And really, this is all about understanding where the candidate's values are and their motivations. All three components of the structured interview process can be handled through behavioral questions or sequence of questions and also assessments, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. So again, the three parts that all interview processes that are successful is, can they do the job, will they do the job, and do they fit your culture? I would make the argument that the cultural component of the interview process really should be first before the sales skill set evaluation, but regardless, it should be part of doing the three components in the structured interview process. In the big picture, we are really saying that the talent evaluation really falls into two parts. There's the job fit part, which is the skill component and the experience end of it. And then likewise, there's the organizational fit, which is the values and the motivation component. I would have to say, in reality, as most companies might do the job fit analysis, but when it comes to the organizational fit side of it, they really fail to ask the right questions or to use assessments for this topic. So when you look at values and motivations, really that's at the heart of what is cultural fit. Does the group values and motivations match to the individual's values and motivations? And when you think about it, the whole issue of values, every company, and trust me, I've done enough consulting on many companies in the mortgage industry, and everybody has a specialized standard of how they get things done. In some companies, they emphasize the sales side. In other companies, it's the operational side. Again, every company, it does vary. So it's not just an issue that the individual is being recruited just from a financial standpoint. I think there's an overemphasis in hiring managers when they always think it's about the money. Again, what we see from a research that the money part of it is essentially not as important as developing expertise and achievement. But when you're looking at values and motivations, where is the company at? Again, let me repeat that. Where's the company's at with their values? And then where's the individual at this current moment in their life with their values and motivation? And a lot of companies really haven't spent time with this topic of where are they at currently. If the market has been really robust, as it was a few years ago, your culture that you had then may not be the current culture, which is obviously a much different marketplace. And so the third part of the values and the motivations is to look at what does a sales candidate get excited about? If it's just waiting for paycheck to paycheck, that would be an early sign that maybe they're not going to fit your culture because that's not really what your company is valuing or your sales team. So again, the cultural fit is all about looking at what are the values and the motivations of the individual at that time of when you are interviewing them, because it's at that point in their life versus where your company is at that time of what you need to have from an origination standpoint. When we look at the best practices for cultural fit, it looks something like this. We would make the argument that the cultural fit part really should be the first part of your interview process. Obviously, some companies do it in the second part, but typically in the beginning, if there's not a cultural fit, the sales talent level of the individual really becomes irrelevant. And so I would suggest that the cultural component can be determined through two ways, and one is by the types of questions that you ask the individual. That would be a definite sign if what the individual's values and motivations are. And then the second side of it is you can use cultural pre-hire assessments, which I'll talk about in a second, the one that we've developed. You can also use video interviewing at this point in the early stages of the interview process. Video interviewing is almost like a Skype format, but you're asking questions to the sales candidate without you having to invest a lot of time. For those that are interested in that, I can be glad to discuss it at another time with you. We have one, but it's quite common in other industries to use video interviewing, and they're certainly very good for these types of issues because you're really not having to invest a lot of time and money through the interviewing process. And then certainly the next side, if you've used behavioral questions or maybe you used a cultural pre-hire, you really want to have the individual talking to several different people so you can get a consistent view of where that person is from a value standpoint and a motivation component. And then finally, once you have had the composite of information from these different types of vehicles, you can make a determination to invest more time by looking at the sales skill component of it and looking at that particular marketplace and that type of analysis that happens typically within the interview process. So the sequence is, certainly you can use pre-hire assessments that are culturally testing, and you can also use the interview process by asking certain behavioral questions that will give you an indication about the current status of the person's values and motivations. So what would these questions look like? There are really kind of three parts that we use when we're training managers in interviewing that you should focus on. The first part are what I would call character questions. The second part is teamwork and communication questions. I'll pick out a few of them just to emphasize to you the types of questions that will give you an idea about the cultural fit of the candidate within your particular company, and so you can make a determination. Some good questions, and again, they're all open-end questions, is, what is the most difficult decision you've ever had to make? It's a great question to ask. You'll be surprised at the answers, but that gives you a real indication of what's important to the person. Likewise, another great question is what are some of the traits of the best boss you ever had? That's a really great question to ask somebody that you're going to be managing, because it'll give you an insight. Did the person say, well, the guy left me alone or gal left me alone, or the person worked with me every single day and he threw parties on every other Friday? In other words, they will give you a sign of what that person is valuing and what motivates them, and can you deliver and match that? It can be a sign right away that you don't have time to spend with them, and they've indicated already that the best boss they ever had worked with them every day and was accessible 24 hours a day. That's not your style. That would be a real sign that this is not somebody that's going to do well working for you. Another great question, especially in today when there's so many arguments between sales and operation. When have you entered a new job in the past? How did you go about developing relationships with other coworkers? A lot comes out when you ask that question, because the individual in today's world is working typically remotely and may not have an operational staff near them. And if that's the case, you really have to make an effort to reach out to get to know others, because you're going to be working with them. As we all know, mortgage banking is a team sport, and when you ask this type of question, the individual really doesn't give a good answer. That would be another early sign that they're going to not be a match for your particular company or team. And finally, I think this is another terrific question. What are the top things that must be present for an organization to communicate effectively? This is an early sign of what is that potential employee wanting out of his company. Does he want to have a sales rally every year? Does he want to have regional meetings, or whatever he's indicating that he needs or she needs, and you're not going to provide that, or for whatever reason can't provide that, that would be a sign that this is someone that's not going to work out very well for you. So there's just some of the behavioral questions that you would ask a sales candidate to really determine and get an indication of where they are from a values and a motivation standpoint. When we look at the cultural assessment, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, we do have one, and let me just tell you a little bit about it. We're looking at what's your current state versus what is your preferred state. I think that's very important when so many companies are having to change. Our assessment evaluates 6 cultural dimensions, starting with what are your dominant characteristics presently, and looking at the organizational leadership, very important. Sometimes what you see with companies, they're talking about family, They might have started the business with 10 people and now there's 500 employees. But is the company at this moment, its cultural situation, really a family? But that's what the assessment is really ascertaining. You're looking at also the management of the employees, the organizational glue, what's really kind of holds this whole thing together. And again, money is not that answer. Every company has their own way of doing things and their own values. So looking at what is the organizational clue is very important. What's the strategic emphasis versus where you are now, where you want to be in the future, and looking at what's the criteria of success? What does it take to be successful at your company? And from a consulting standpoint, that question you would think would be uniform within our industry, but that's not the case. Every company values something different and has different motivations. So this can be an eye-opening experience to go through an evaluation, but the pre-hire cultural assessment will see if that person matches to what you are saying that your cultural fit should be. So I would really recommend thinking about using that type of assessment in your company. So today's takeaway is that cultural fit is a really critical part of the screening process when evaluating sales talent, especially important today to have it in the early stages of the interview. And from that standpoint, it's important to be part of a structured interview process. So why don't we open it up for some questions? We have one question on what would be the reaction of a top producer if you're now asking these cultural fit type of behavioral questions. Well, in our experience, and we get this question asked a lot, what we see is that top producer types and high achievers really are impressed with the fact that you as a company or as a sales team have standards and just do not hire anyone. If you ever talk to top producers, and I certainly do that all day long, they will all tell you they don't want to work for somebody that just will hire anybody off the street, and they certainly don't want to be surrounded with underperformers. So that's a great question, and certainly I would tell you about not being hesitant with asking these behavioral type questions, because those are the people, the high achievers in particular, they like the fact that you do have standards and also that you use assessments. We see that all the time. Managers many times are afraid that an assessment will just ruin their recruiting process. What we hear from all of our clients is that assessments really, those people are not the ones that are hesitant to take them. It's more on the side where the manager feels awkward asking somebody to take them, but that isn't what we see. We see the top achievers are very competitive, and so taking assessments is just another form of competition. Another question that I received, do companies really know their culture? That is a great question. I would have to tell you from a consulting standpoint, when you go into companies, as I've already used as an illustration, many companies that started smaller are now large. They kind of lost the trend line of what their company culture is today, and really what it started out with and what it needs to be now in 2014 can be dramatically different. So that's a great question. I would say many senior management on this particular issue can't really determine internally their culture for whatever reason, and really probably need third parties to really help them make that evaluation. So what a company's culture, it can change over time, it can change over circumstances, but it really is an important process that the good companies go through to make sure that their culture is what is needed to be successful today. If you've grown fast and the culture has changed, here's another question. What happens with you have a mismatch. Some employees are operating under one culture and other employees are operating under another culture. That I see quite a bit, especially now as we've moved from a refinance market to a purchase money market. The cultures that supported those business lines and business opportunities can be much different now. It's an issue where, and we'll speak about this a little bit later, it's an issue where the leadership, the direct manager, has to be in contact with the individual to see the culture that they signed up for. Is that the culture that the company currently has, and is that the culture that the company is going to have going forward? So that is why the role of the first line supervisor is such a crucial question. They're all great questions. If you have any other questions, certainly email me or give me a call, 800-875-0222. I'd be glad to answer any that you have.